Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head on uatv. I am Oles Gerjuk. Ukraine must make progress on privatizing state enterprises if it wishes to receive the next tranche of money from the IMF, which is rescheduled for spring 2018. Also, the same requirement is included in the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, which is drawing a lot of discussion lately. But since 2014, when big privatization was pushed for the first time, the government doesn't seem to have been at all successful. What are the expectations for next year? To answer these questions, we are joined in the studio by Serhii Fursa, a major investment banker. Hello and thank you for coming.
Good morning.
So, Mr. Fursa, first of all, why would we need the privatization of state enterprises?
First of all, big privatization is a huge signal for investors. Now we got very bad situation with our Ukrainian economy. It's very short recovery, 2%, and to have enough recovery to satisfy big expectations of Ukrainian people, we need a huge flow of investments. But we would never give them without a huge signal to the investors that investors are waiting here. In Ukrainian history, we got once such signal when we made privatization, second privatization, Kryvyi Start. And after that, we got even quiz of foreign investors that knocked to the doors of IFIs, of IMF and Ukrainian government. That's why, first of all, that's why we need privatization. Second step, it's anti-corruption measure, because state enterprises, it's just the biggest place of corruption in Ukraine, because a lot of people sitting there on the cash flows and operating these cash flows. And as a result, we got a strange situation where people, this government bodies or friend of government bodies, they privatizing profits and people nationalized losses. And the second, and this only the third thing what we're thinking about when we talking about privatization, it's money for it. Because it's when we're talking about privatization, sometimes people think that we need to get the best price ever. But no, the best price, the money, it's not the most important thing. Signal to the investors is the first of all. Second is an anti-corruption measure, and third part is money.
Well, so far Ukraine is failing in fulfilling the privatization plan. What are the expectations for the next year?
I think that we do not have very optimistic expectation, because why we are failing? Because there is a huge sabotage of privatization due to the corruption thing. Corruption.
People have their interest.
Yeah, because people have their interest in the state enterprises. And if you will look to the short list of the next companies to be privatized, it's not the companies that were interested by investors, but at the same time, such entities like Centrenergo that should be on the first list, on the short list, moved from list to list, if you can measure it, for the last 3 years, because in a very stupid way. Like people said, okay, we will privatize it next spring. Oh, no, we don't ready. Let's do it on November. In November, oh no, it's heating season. We can't privatize it during heating season. Let's do it in April. It's year by year, the people doing the same strategy.
So this is the game of money embezzlement, if I understand correctly.
It's a game of corrupt busters, to be honest, because if you looked at the good, even not good, just state enterprises, their cash flows helps people to make their lives and lives of their grandchildren very wealthy. And that stops government from privatization.
Yeah, and the state enterprises are being funded by the state and we pay taxes, so basically these are money of Ukrainians involved in all of these situations.
Yes,
right?
And the funniest thing is that Ukrainians doesn't understand it. And
yeah, the social polls actually admit that Ukrainians are very much against the privatization. And that's my next question to ask, why?
Because Ukrainians has allergy for privatization, because so-called privatization is what happens in early 90s, when all these big entities that was under state control come to the control of oligarchs. And people used to think that it is privatization, not a transparent tender when everybody have just competition by price and nothing more. It's a real privatization, and what we see only once in the Ukrainian life at Krivoristali case. But people used to think that privatization, it what they have seen in the early 90s. But it was schemes like when their entities were owned by people, yes, by like people of Ukraine, were taken out and moved to the control of oligarchs. And when usual Ukrainian heard about privatization, what he thinks about? He thinks about Azovstal, for instance, or another big plants, or Karl Marx plant confectionaries that were used to be state enterprises and suddenly became for nothing, for not money, without any competition, without any free tender, became an oligarch ownership.
So basically Ukrainians are afraid that oligarchs will seize the state enterprises and just get more profit out of it. But then what would stop oligarchs from privatizing these state enterprises?
Because oligarchs never buy something for a fair price. It's in oligarchs' nature. They can take something by undercover negotiations, but never pay a fair price, never. If some oligarchs will pay a fair price in competition with some foreign investors, okay, no problem, he paid fair price. Okay, it's no problem. You see, you made a signal to investors. You see, people competition. There was no special. There is something putting down that the buyer could be only Ukrainian producers that have experience on Ukrainian market. If there is no such story, if there is competition between Ukrainian buyer and few international companies, and Ukrainian buyer will overpay them, okay, it's no problem. But oligarchs never do it, because in oligarchs' nature to take something for free.
So basically, what could we do? What could Ukrainian government do to prevent this and to make the whole procedure of privatization more clear and clear enough?
They just have to do it because it's just their obligation to do it. It's not a complicated task. You just have to implement what have done during Krivoristali privatization. Now we're passing this law of privatization.
Yeah, the bill was adopted
only first reading. The second
yes.
reading to be in the next few weeks or months. I don't know.
What is this bill about?
This bill helps to sell state property, but mostly it's talking about small companies, because in Ukraine we have more than 3,000 of entities. For instance, in France it's 60. And,
just 60,
yes,
comparing
60,
to 3,000.
67 something, and 3,000 in Ukraine. So it's uncomparable stuff. Maybe 90% of it's very small enterprises, very small buildings, etc. So you have to sell it like fresh sandwiches. Yes, you can't control it under state government. There is a Prozora sale system, and you have to put it in it and sell. It's first very important thing that put it in this law. Second one is how the price is formed of big entities, because when we're talking about sabotage of big privatization, and there is an example of Odessa plant.
Odessa plant.
And the last auction was failed, and there was two failed auctions, and first of this was failed because they put very high prices. Just 500 million. It was everybody on the market understood that it's very high.
And also that company has a lot of debt.
Yes, it was unmarket priced, but somebody in the government decides that this price is good for them. Due to this law, you have to find an investment bank who will be your advisor, and this advisor will tell you the price. No some state firm or some academic research, etc., etc., etc. This should prevent from such things like sabotaging by prices.
Well, and you also mentioned that basically privatization means investments. But for these investments to come, everybody mentions that we need developed infrastructure. So would investors be interested in these enterprises if we don't have very much developed infrastructure? How do you think?
I still will talk about Privatization case. The same infrastructure, the same rule of law, even worse situation with rule of law than we have now, but there was a queue of investors. Yes, if we will implement anti-corruption measures, if we will implement systems that will help you to do something with the rule of law of Ukraine, the price of this influence, the queue of all the investors will be much bigger. But even in the current condition, I think that investors will come. But the quality of these investors, yes. How much money they will bring with them, it all depends. Because, you know, risky, high risks, low money, they're ready to pay. But even in the current infrastructure, even with the current situation, with the rule of law, etc., they're ready to invest in Ukraine. Maybe due to the situation that there is a lot of money around the world, in the current market situation around the world. So if we will do some such privatization as they expected from us, they will come.
But will foreign investors be interested in Ukrainian enterprises even though Ukraine is in the war?
Nobody really...
Does these reasons stop them?
No. War is not as a reason, because everybody understands that it's frozen conflict already. If you looked on Moldova and Transnistria case, everybody understands that what happens in Donetsk and Lugansk happens in Donetsk and Lugansk and stays there. So nothing stops you from investing in Kiev, in Vinnytsia, or in Odessa. So the war was a reason that stops investors due to unpredictability, but only in early 2015, but not now.
So my very last question is, what is the conclusion out of this? The privatization next year fails again?
It could fail again. There is a small chance that we will have some successful privatization, but I do not believe in it.
It will fail because of?
Because of corruption.
Okay. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
That was Serhii Fursa, investment banker. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.